Hi, everyone. Welcome to Let's Get Literary. I'm going to chat with Shawn Robinson, author of Annalyn, the Canadian Spy book series. We'll talk to Shawn about this little detective, what inspired him to start writing, and of course discuss the power of reading and the importance of getting books into the hands of children. So let's welcome our guest, Shawn Robinson. Tell us a little bit about where are you joining us from and give us a little bit of your background.
Okay. Well, I'm actually joining you from Ontario, Canada. So I'm in southwestern Ontario. So depending on where your listeners are coming from, Canada may seem like a normal place, or it may seem like a winter wonderland. But we're enjoying a bit of a heat spell right now, and it's quite beautiful outside, and enjoying the summertime. And so we're in southwestern Ontario. That's a couple of hours, I think, from Port Huron, Michigan. That's roughly where we are in terms of just perspective in terms of the United States and so forth.
So we're actually based in Long Island, New York. So not terribly far.
No.
So Shawn, tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got started on writing.
Well, my story was, I've been telling stories for years, right? I've always enjoyed telling stories. And ever since I was a teenager, I got involved in some camp work. And I learned that stories was a great way to really connect with kids. You know, you could, if you tell a good story or if you tell a boring story, right? That was kind of a make it or break it with a lot of kids. And so I kind of started to learn and develop the ability to be able to tell stories to children. And I got involved in at my church in teaching Sunday school, and just really focused in on how to communicate with kids. But I had never really done an awful lot of in terms of writing a full story or a full novel. I'd never done anything like that. And then a number of years ago, I ended up getting sick, quite sick. Ended up to give kind of a bit of perspective, my hobby is backpacking, like the kind where you put like a big backpack on your back and climb up the side of a mountain. And so I was in great physical shape. I was just really strong and really healthy. And then I woke up with a pain in my eye one day. And a week later, I was in isolation in a hospital with a viral infection in my brain. And as I laid there in the hospital, I really wasn't sure if I was going to live or die. And that's hard as a parent, you know, when you're thinking about your children, right? You're thinking, what will it be like for them? You know, are they going to have to grow up without a dad? And you know, and you know, people survive. There's challenges, right? But then I thought, you know, I didn't want that pain for them, and I was struggling with that a lot. And then I thought to myself, I tell stories to my kids before bed. I just kind of make them up. What if I make up a story for them to read? And if this did turn out that I didn't survive, I would have something, they would have something of me to be able to kind of read in the future. And so I started to write something, and it just kind of all came together, outlined a story, a big long one, and started writing this novel. And you know, I don't want to, you know, give a spoiler, but I survived. If that, anyways, and I ended up getting out of the hospital, and I had to, you know, the viral infection, it does in your brain, has quite an effect on you. It was encephalitis was the big name for it, but it's a lot of people don't survive. A lot of people don't walk away from it, literally walk away. They can't walk, or they lose the ability to speak. Some people can lose their memory entirely. I initially could barely walk straight. I would walk down the street just kind of weaving back and forth, but I started to get a little bit stronger and a little bit better, and I just continued to write. And so I finished that book, and it ended up being a full novel. It's called Aristana, the Key Quest. Never planned on sharing it with anyone outside the family, but as I shared it with my boys, I shared it with my wife, and my wife read it, and she said, you know, this is a good story. This is something you should share with other people. And I ended up writing a second one, and then a third one. And then she kept encouraging me, put your other stories down in print as well. And so I started doing this, and then I ended up moving towards publishing them. Ended up publishing, I have 11 books out now, but the 3 in the Aristana series, the original series, a couple of books of short stories that are based on stories I used to tell my boys when they were younger, and then my new series, a spy series for kids. And it just, I haven't stopped writing since. It's just become a passion of mine.
Everything you're talking about really struck a chord, because unfortunately she did pass away from her sudden illness, but her husband is my co-founder, and we developed in these libraries, her name was Hindi, and we developed in these libraries to honor her legacy. And we always talk about, you know, as a mom, is she proud of what we're putting forth for her children?
Mhm.
You know, we've donated almost 100,000 books. We're all over the world, continuously collecting books, donating them, talking to donors, recipients. And we always talk about what are the kids going to take away from this? So as you were saying that, a few aspects, of course, um, really touched. And it's, first of all, it's tremendously scary. I'm so glad to hear you have such a great outcome. And I'm sure now you kind of, as a dad and as a writer, now I feel like you are so empowered. You must feel so empowered to take your gifts that you have, right? Both in continuing your life and continuing your talents, to share that with everyone. And wow, what a story that is to hear. And in the first 5 minutes of our interview, to really go in depth. Um, that's incredible. Was your first book intended for children as well? The
It
Key Quest
was.
series?
Yeah, and I actually wrote, my boys at that time were 13 and 8, but I wrote it with characters based on them somewhat. And so the main character is Liam, that's my oldest son, and then the other character is Ezra, that's my youngest son. And so I wrote it basically as a 13-year-old and a 12-year-old. I made my one son a bit older, and the story is about them. And so it was kind of a gift for them, for kids. And so I find it really connects well with kids around that age, you know, the 9 to 12, 13 age.
Wow. And tell us a little bit about Annalyn the Spy.
Well, you know, that one was kind of a bit of a surprise. They're all a surprise for me. I never know when a story's going to hit, and I just it's kind of a funny thing. When a story hits, it's almost as if it's like this fire inside me that has to get out, and I have to kind of get it down on paper, and it kind of burns within me until it happens. And I was actually at my church one day, and I was chatting with this young girl in our church that we're very close to, her family, and she was 8 at the time, 7 or 8, and she shared with me a toy that she had received for Christmas as a Christmas present, and it was a spy gadget. And so I just, after church, I told my wife about it. I said, "Oh yeah, this is what Annalyn, this girl, had," and she goes, "Oh, she's really into spies right now." And so then my mind got spinning, and I thought, well, what if I wrote her a kind of as a birthday gift coming up? I could write a little short story for her as a and call it Annalyn the Canadian Spy. And I write a lot of weird humor and uh, I kind of think in terms of, well, after you have a viral infection in the brain, you think differently, and I write weird, odd humor now. And so I wrote this book about this little girl who gets hired to be a Canadian spy, and she's just kind of surprised about the whole thing, and they're just like, "Hey, you're a spy now, go to it." And she has to fly a jet and everything. She has no idea how to do it, but that's part of the fun of the story. And so I wrote this for her and gave it to her, and then I got thinking, this would make a great series. And so as I started pursuing this, I ended up kind of getting these more and more ideas, and ended up coming up with a set of 8 ideas actually for 8 books, but I only have 6 of them written at this point. And ended up putting them together and creating kind of the story about Annalyn continuing to go on missions, and none of them are normal missions. There's a lot of Canadian quirks in it and so forth. You know, in Canada, we have moose, not in this area, not where I'm at, but we have moose. So moose become a major character in it. Maple syrup is one of those things that Canadians just love to produce, right? I mean, our flag has a maple leaf on it, right? And so maple syrup becomes one of the big things. And we have these missions where somebody's watering down the maple syrup, and she's got to track them down, right? And it's just a fun thing like that really gets kids excited about reading.
How did Annalyn take it when she realized she became kind of the inspiration for this crazy, wonderful series?
She's funny because her mom was just kind of blown over, right, and just really thrilled with it. Anna Lynn is in a spot in her life where she likes stories and likes to read, but then doesn't like to read. So she's kind of at this interesting spot. So she was thrilled by it, but then at the same time, she struggles to kind of keep reading.
No,
And so I was telling her a little while ago, I said, "Oh yeah, there's all these books," and she was just thrilled, right? But she's kind of back and forth between that interesting stage.
my daughter is the same age, actually. She's turning 8, so it's hard, you know. It's hard for them to want to read, especially now in the summer, school's over, their brain kind of checks out. And we have to just engage them, right? And with these interesting stories, that's what makes it. I'm curious to know from you, what is it about storytelling that you love? You mentioned you were always telling stories. What is it? Is it the message that that comes through? Is it the speaking of it?
I think one of the things that really grabs me, and um, and has always grabbed me, but especially right now, is the ability to be able to surprise someone, right? To pull them in, and even if they know what's about to happen, still surprise them with it, and excite them with it. And so when I would tell stories to my kids, I at that time I had learned the kind of a bit of a skill to be able to kind of map out a story really quick. And I would say something like, give me an animal. And they'd say a hippo. And I would just take a few seconds and map out this story. And it would involve maybe a catapult and this and that and so forth. And I love to be able to kind of shock my kids and to be able, like, hey, this was going to happen, a sudden twist. And when I write these stories, I love to be able to create something that is very unusual and unexpected. So in the Annalyn series, for instance, right out of the gate, she's told, you got to take your jet on this mission. And she says, I get to fly in a jet? And he says, no, you fly a jet. And she says, I don't know how to do that. And he says, well, it's not hard. And she says, what do you mean? Are you sure? And he says, oh, well, I mean, everybody just climbs in and then it flies away. How hard can it be? I've never done it, but I'm sure you can do it just fine. And she has to hop in there and she has to follow the instructions on the thing in front of her and figure it out. And it just kind of creates this fun experience, I think, for kids as they're going through it, where they never know what's going to happen, but they know it's going to be a fun adventure.
That's great. What is your writing process like? You said you map out the story. Do you still do that when you write your books? Do you have a specific set of steps you follow each time you start diving into a story?
Absolutely. I know there's a lot of authors that can do it without that. I can't. Um, for a number of reasons, but one of them is the ongoing struggles that I face due to my illness. It creates a struggle for me to concentrate and keep sequential thought in my mind. And so what I do is I map it out very carefully, and I know where I'm going with each of these. I know what areas I need to give lots of detail and what areas I just can be vague on it. And I map out a story from start to finish, and so I know how things are more or less going to end. And sometimes things surprise me. A lot of times things surprise me as we go. The story writes itself, but if I don't map it out, I don't know where I'm going, and I stop and I stare at the page. But if I have an idea of where I'm going, I can just write and write, and then the book comes together in a relatively short time.
Do you have your children or family members read drafts of your books and give you input because they are children's books, or do you keep it a surprise until you're finished with it?
Yes, absolutely. And because there's always that realization that I, as an adult, will respond a certain way to a book, but a child will just, they could be bored or they could be confused, or it could send a very different message to a child. And so, one of the things I do very early on in the process is I try to get either I get a print copy ready ahead of time, or I just do it with a digital copy, and I'll sit down with my boys and I'll read it through to them. With the Annalyn series, I sat down with the whole family actually, and just we read through them. But I'll read through it bit by bit, and at the end of it, I'll ask, okay, what did you take away from this, and what do you think? And they'll give me a lot of feedback, and it's fun for them because then they're kind of realizing, hey, we get to offer a bit of critique and adjust things and so forth. So what my one son helped me to adjust something major in one of my books, kind of a whole chapter and a whole group of people that the main character met. And my other son will give me feedback. Okay, this was confusing for me or something, and I'll mark it. And then I know there's something I got to address.
It's interesting to see feedback from your children, right? In your project, when we plan events for our nonprofit, and I'll tell my children about it. My daughter, like I said, is 8. My son is only 5.5. And I'll say, well, did you think about doing this at the event? Or maybe we could work on doing this together. And even though it's something, as an adult, I need to oversee, getting feedback from children is so interesting because most of our events are family friendly. So it's interesting. I know you name your characters, it seems like part of, people that you've met. Do you put hidden messages in your books that you're looking for certain people to maybe take away and kind of hit in maybe a phrase that a friend of yours uses?
I do at times, and I think I've done that a bit more with the Aristana series than I have with the Annalyn series or anything like that. Um, and here's one of the challenges that with the results of kind of the viral infection is sometimes I know I have done something, but I can't think of what it is. So in about 10 minutes, it'll come through, two or three examples might come. But I've done this a number of times where I put these little things in waiting for people to kind of to react to it when they read. I've done that, and I love putting other people I know in and quirks about them in and so forth. So one of my characters in one of the Anna Lynn books is actually based on a friend of mine. And so because she's a Canadian spy, she'll go and interact with these other characters from other countries. And I have a friend who's Danish. And so I made him a Danish spy in it. And he looks a little like Chuck Norris. So he walks around looking he looks like Chuck Norris in the book and has a shirt that says, "I look like Chuck Norris." But then I made the character very quirky, like my friend as well. And told him about it. And he hasn't read the book yet. And so I'm waiting for his reaction on that.
That's fun. That's the best part, right? When you have this like hidden meaning that only a few people will take away.
Yeah.
When you write, do you have a special place you write it in your home, music that's going on, a certain type of environment you need?
I generally need quiet. I need to be able to focus if there's distractions. My wife is a voice teacher, for
Wow.
instance. And so sometimes she'll sit on a couch in the room while I'm writing, and then she's working on something, and then she'll start to hum something because she's trying to work through something as she's continually learning more and more. One of the things that makes her such a good voice teacher. And so as soon as I hear that hum, I lose everything. That sound. And whereas if I have quiet, and I know a lot of writers will put on music. If I put on music, I'm done. So I kind of find a nice quiet environment, and then I can write.
That's awesome. How long does it take you to, have a book in your hand from the time the story pops in your head?
It depends on the story, of course. Most of what I've written has been children's books. And so when it comes to an Annalyn, the Canadian Spy book, it's a very short book. They're about 10,000 words, something like that. Sometimes I can have the idea, and then I've got to write it out, and I outline it. And once I have the outline, I can have it typed up in 2 or 3 days because it's relatively short, and because it's a kid's book, it doesn't have to be as intricate and detailed and so forth. Then it's a matter. I focus in on a lot of self-publishing. I help a lot of authors with how to work through some of these things. So the process of going from typed up to print is pretty old hat to me. It gets pretty simple in a lot of ways. So I can get if I have a completed manuscript, I could potentially have it in hand in a couple of weeks. And most of that time is spent waiting for the printer to send it to me. So it can go pretty quick once things are together. The editing process slows you down. But then longer books, like I'm writing a fantasy book series for adults at the moment. And the books are significantly longer and significantly more detailed and intricate. And so those ones they take months and months and months just to write, let alone edit and clean up and so forth.
With the pandemic that's going on, I'm curious, how have you shared your book? Have you been doing virtual storytellings? Have you been communicating with other authors or readers?
I've been doing a lot of communicating with other authors, but a lot of what I've been doing is I've been trying to throw my stories up on YouTube so people can just listen to them there. They listen to me reading them, and then I also have started a podcast because I thought, well, a lot of kids will just want to listen to the stories at home. So I've been putting, I think I have Aristana and my short stories, Jerry the Squirrel. It's about a squirrel inventor. And I have put a lot of those up on a podcast as well. So a lot of kids are able to just kind of listen to them.
Do you put sound effects in your podcast? Do you use different voices to engage the children?
Well, I've tried a little bit of different voices in terms of making them up myself. The challenge is that I'm not always consistent. So I forget what a character sounds like, and they come out. And so most of my characters have sounded pretty much the same, but I have one character in my Aristana series that his voice from the beginning is very different than the voice in the end. But so that's the most I have done. And then my son is quite musical, and he's developed a an intro for me as well, musical intro and so forth. So that's kind of the extent of the voices and sound effects that I
Well,
use.
it's fun during the pandemic. Everyone, self included,
Yeah.
found something interesting to do. We started this podcast because we were home and we didn't feel comfortable having volunteers in our homes sorting books, labeling books. We tried to kind of stay away from that, but we still wanted to engage with our readers, with our supporters. So we started this podcast just to start networking and meeting other wonderful people in the industry. It's really great. What's one of the most rewarding things you found since you started writing? Maybe is it some feedback from a reader or a note you received somewhere?
Well, the one of it just happened the other day. If you had asked me a week or two, I would have given you I would have given you a very different answer. But just the other day, a friend of mine came across a quote from somebody in town, in the same town that I live in, that I'm not even sure I had remembered who they were. They had bought my series a while ago, and then as I looked at it, I began to remember selling them the series. But there's a man that's in town that's reading the books, my Aristana series, to their kids, and then he came across a small section in one of the books that I'd even forgotten that I had written, which is not a surprise. I forget an enormous amount of stuff, but he took it and he just kind of scanned it in and he put it on Facebook and said, "Hey, this is one of the most like really encouraging thing I read," or something, and then he tagged me at the bottom, and it was just what it was the in one of my Aristana books, they were the main character and a few other people, including his grade 8 teacher, which was kind of a strange character kind of to add into this fantasy series. And we're driving in a van with about 13 people in it, all squished. And he asked her, "Well, why aren't you speeding?" And then she stopped and she didn't answer at first. And then he was a little confused. Well, maybe she didn't hear me or she's upset or I don't know what's going on. And then she started to explain to him. She said, it's times like this that it comes down to making the right decision, even though this and this and this, we need to be able to kind of make a good choice and remain who we are in the midst of a crisis. And I hadn't even realized I had forgotten that I had written that. And it was very encouraging to this guy who's reading his story to his two little daughters, who would, most of that would just go right over their head probably. And it was just so thrilling to me to come across this online. I don't even know the guy, right? And it was just really wonderful.
It's so nice to see the impact you're making,
Mm-hmm.
right? Without even realizing it. Sometimes we get tagged in photos from all over the country of recipients. I actually got photos of a local food distribution center. We started dropping off books there so that
Mm-hmm.
as the families are taking food, the children can also, while the parents are waiting in line, stop at the little library they put together and take a book home to keep. Uh,
Wow. Wow.
and so all of a sudden today, and I forgot, we did this 2 weeks ago, and life, and COVID is a little bit of
Yeah.
that mix. So I had gotten a photo, and it's all these children, and they're wearing masks, and they're all holding these books up. And I get between my full-time job, between being a parent, it's hard juggling, and I forgot that we were there giving those books, and just getting that photo with a little blurb saying, these kids, we were able to collect with your help 1,000 books to donate within the week to the children who stopped by. And you're right, it's empowering to know that you're making a difference. And even in your writing, the thoughts that you have, they're really hitting people hard, right? You put
Impacting
this in your
others,
book,
right? Yeah.
and now someone you don't even know put it, and that one sentence that maybe to you took a few minutes to put together, that changed this guy's day and this man's perspective.
Oh, yeah, and that's thrilling. And I mean, I'm sure you tell the story about the children's world and the books and in the masks and so forth, and that's gotta kind of leave you on cloud nine for a couple of weeks, right? I'm sure you're just kind of dancing around when you see that.
Oh, for sure. Because, a lot of times we donate all over the world, and it's hard for me to track down all of our recipients. So when we do get a photo, we once got this letter handwritten by children.
Mm-hmm.
They sent it to us in the mail. And it's great. And you know what, most importantly, I'm assuming you have this connection to the Key Quest book series. To us, anything I see, I show him these children, and I show David, my co-founder, because that's what it's about. It's about making sure that their mom is still making a difference long after she's here with us.
Mm-hmm.
Every book we donate actually has a photo of her, a quote
Oh,
by a
wow.
former student in the sticker on the inside. That's part of the process. We label them all. So we like to really show, look at these children in California, in India, in Israel, in Puerto Rico. They got these books. Look, there's a picture of someone holding a picture of your mom.
Yeah.
So it's great when you get that. What are some books that you read as a child that stuck with you?
Well, I read anything I could get my hands on as a child. So I went through book after book after book, and even books that I would not normally have picked up if I was out somewhere else. Same with my grandma, for instance. I'd go find what book she had on her shelf, and just grab something and start to read it. And one of the series I read over and over and over again was the Chronicles of Narnia. I just love that, and I'm actually currently reading that to my youngest son right now. We're on the Prince Caspian book at the moment, and I remember just reading those and just loving those and imagining myself in those stories as the characters. Another one was a book. I don't know how many people have heard of this one, but it's by Diana Wynne Jones, and it's called Homeward Bounders. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's a very unusual book, but it hit me so much that and drew me in so much that 20 years later I couldn't remember the name of the author or the book, but I still thought about it all the time. And I used to walk around to librarians or school teachers and say, "Hey, this is what I remember of the story. Do you know what that is?" And they say, "Oh no, I have no idea what that was." And I spent years looking for it until actually my sister had managed to track it down. And I've now read it about 3 times as an adult, and it's just an incredible story. I just finished actually reading it to my sons just a little while ago.
You keep mentioning that you read to your children.
Yeah.
I want to discuss the importance of doing that because not only do we try to, get books into the hands of children, but we try to explain to adults
Mm-hmm.
how crucial it is to read to your children to make sure they are reading. Why do you think it's important to sit down, take 15 minutes out of your night or your day and read with your child?
It's not enough to have the skill of reading, right? And a lot of us, and I mean, we're all over the spectrum in terms of our abilities and so forth, but a lot of kids can develop that ability to read, but that's never enough, right? We have to take it a step further where there's a passion and an excitement. We say about in terms of just education, in terms of reading, that if you can read, you can learn anything. If you can't read, you've stopped, right? You can't learn new things unless somebody else takes the time to tell it to you. And so part of it for me is developing a passion in my kids for reading, developing a passion for story, developing a passion for information. And the more I read to them, I think the more excited they get about that kind of thing. And they begin to realize that, a movie is one thing, but a book takes you on a journey, and a book takes you in just an incredible journey. So that's one of the things. And even every now and then I'll still read. My boys are now 16 and 11. And I usually read to my 11-year-old every night. But every now and then I'll get a book, and my 16-year-old will come in and we'll read through the book with the three of us. Because I think there is something about investing in story that we all just really like, and we need it.
So, what concrete advice can you give to our viewers, our listeners? Imagine it's, a family with 2 working parents who are really just trying to juggle being a parent, working full time. What few steps can you give them to get them into the mode of starting this, important routine?
It is a challenge because we're all busy, right? I think one of the things is you have to find, and this is different for every age group. When your child's 2, it's very different than when they're 12, right? But you have to find a book that you can all enjoy, right? And you can all get passionate about. And I think when you get into slightly some of the older age, 6, 7, 8, 9, a child can really get into a story that an adult can get into as well. And I think that's very helpful, finding a story that people actually really can sink their teeth into and really love and actually look forward to. You want to be able to finish the chapter, not just the child finish the chapter and say one more chapter, but you as an adult be saying, my voice is scratchy. I'm tired. My eyes are drooping, but I don't think I can stop here. I think we need to go a little bit more with that. And I think that's one of the things. When my oldest son was really young, 2 or 3 years of age, and reading to him at that time, I ended up coming across this book of poems that for one reason or another he enjoyed and I really enjoyed. And I'm not a great singer, but I would sing it to him, and I would make up tunes for the songs, and I would go through night after night singing this kind of thing to him. And it was something that for whatever reason connected with each of us. And I think that's an important thing.
I think engaging with your child and finding something that does entertain you and entertain them. Like you said, sometimes my child picks a book and he hears me yawning while I'm reading it. And then he's not engaged, and certainly I'm not, entertained or even acting out the parts. Finding a book series or any kind of book, or like I actually used to read Shel Silverstein poems with my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
She loved them because they were silly and we never knew what the next line would say. I think that's really great words of advice. Tell our listeners and viewers where they can find you, how they can learn more about you. Give us your information so they could, get to know you and your books.
Well, I love to hear from readers, and so readers can usually find me on Goodreads. I'm on there with my Aristana series, and you can find me on Facebook. I have an author page there. It's Shawn P.B. Robinson Author, and my website is ShawnPBRobinson.com. Everybody wonders if PB stands for peanut butter. And sometimes I tell them whether it does or doesn't, or sometimes I don't. But it's ShawnPBRobinson.com. And that's a blog I have on self-publishing, but you just click on the little top there about on the top where it says about Shawn, or if you want to click on the top where it says books, you get a little bit of better idea of the books that I write and so forth.
Anything you'd like to add to our viewers, to our readers about your books, about your journey, about literacy, anything you feel you want to make a shout out about?
Well, just this, one of the things I was looking through Hindy's the website there, reading, and one of the things I would like to add, and which isn't directly about my books, just about our shared passion. Putting books into the hands of kids isn't just about the physical process of getting it there. Your goal is to get them to read. And your goal is to open up their eyes, their mind, their whole life to more, to story, to this passion for reading, to explore. And I think that's something I think we all as adults, we need to take that responsibility on us. And so I get excited about that in my writing, to be able to pour into it characters that people can be excited about, can be loved, even if they're quirky and weird and unusual, they can be excited about, but also some characters that you can really look up to, and you can see these shining examples of, that's what I want to be. That's how I want. If I was ever in that strange situation, I would like to be able to get through it like that. And I think we as adults, we need to take that upon ourselves to be able to give something wonderful to kids. Otherwise, how are they going to get excited about reading?
I think absolutely it is a partnership, not only with teachers and students. We can't leave it up to the, educators to do it. And once they come back at 3-4 o'clock to check out and say, oh, you did everything you had to do, we're done. And I work in a school, so I hear about it all the time. It really is a partnership with us as adults, not only to get books into the hands of the children who really are struggling to afford books, but to do whatever we can to help teach them the importance of reading. Because just like you said, if you're not reading and you're not able to read, you're not going to be able to do much these days. And once you know how to read and once you love reading, you could really get to do anything. You can, whether it's by, reading books about the trade or the industry or the field you want to learn, or just by continuing your schooling. Reading is really the foundation, and we need to do what we can. And by coming together, hopefully we will.
Yeah, absolutely.
I thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us. Thanks for everything. We hope you stay healthy and stay safe. And we really wish you all the best.
Well, thank you, Leslie, and thank you for having me on the show. This has been wonderful, and you're a great interviewer, and it's great to be able to chat with you and talk with you about books.